Welcome to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on الميادين television, coming to you from the Lebanese International University in the great port city of Sidon in Lebanon. Tonight we're talking about Iran, what's going on between the West and Iran. Why have the American and British governments turned a big U-turn in their attitude towards the Islamic Republic? Or have they made a big U-turn? Or is it all just camouflage? We'll be examining this question with a clever and young audience here at the LIU. As many of you know, I have sat in the British Parliament for more than a quarter of a century. It is the scene of many crimes against the Arabs, but also against the people of Iran. More than half a century ago, the British government and its intelligence services, acting in concert with the United States of America, but with the British playing the leading role, overthrew the elected democratic government of Dr. Mossadegh, who had the temerity to nationalize the oil under his own country's soil, thus robbing it from the British pirate companies which had exploited it for so long and wanted to remain in control of it. Although Mossadegh was elected, democratic, and enlightened in his views, it was too much to bear for the Western governments, who launched a whole program of destabilization, subversion, and coup d'etat. They reinstated the Shah of Persia. They brought him back from exile and placed him back again on the peacock throne. And for many decades thereafter, the Shah ruled his country in their interests, in the interests of the British and American corporations, and in the interests of the foreign policy of the British and American governments. And then more than 30 years ago came the great upheaval, the great Islamic revolution led by the late Ayatollah Khomeini, which moved millions of people in Iran onto the streets, proving that when the people are united, they can never be defeated. It didn't matter that the Shah had the most fearsome military and security apparatus anywhere in this region. It didn't matter how many guns the Shah had at his disposal. When there are millions of people on the street in front of you, not afraid to die, then all the armies in the world are useless. And thus the Iranian people overthrew the Shah of Persia, the grimmest tyrant in a region full of tyrants, and began to make their own course. One of the paths in that course was the determination to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. The Iranian government never had any intention of building nuclear weapons. If I were them, I would have myself built a nuclear weapon. I don't know why Britain's allowed to have nuclear weapons, but Iran is not. I don't know why Israel down the road is allowed to have hundreds of nuclear weapons, but Iran is not. But the Iranians are theologically bound not to develop nuclear weapons, because fatwa after fatwa from their leadership has made it clear that such weapons are haram, are illegal, and will not be developed. But that hasn't stopped the country which does have hundreds of nuclear weapons, namely the so-called State of Israel, being determined to corral the whole world into a process of sanction and threats of war against Iran. Thus, Iran has been going through some very tough times. But it seems that that's beginning to come to an end. When the new president of Iran, President Rouhani, who was my constituent when he studied in Glasgow, and I was a member of Parliament in Glasgow. I helped him out once. I'm sure he remembers that. When President Rouhani went to New York for the United Nations General Assembly, well, the Americans were throwing flowers at him in TV studios and from the White House. A telephone call was made by President Obama, and a new era appears to be opening up. Anti-American billboards are being taken down in some parts of Iran. The British Foreign Secretary, who had been one of the most hawkish adherents to the Israeli line against Iran, is now equally throwing flowers at the Islamic Republic. The British Embassy in Tehran is about to reopen, as is the Iranian Embassy in London. And everyone suddenly is talking about the fact that they can do business with the government of Iran. What do they want in exchange? What will Iran give them in exchange? Does this represent a climb down by the West or a climb down by Iran? These are vitally important questions, nowhere more than here in Lebanon, where the relationship between the people of Lebanon and of Syria and the Iranian government is of such significance. We'll be discussing that with the audience here today at the LIU in Sidon, and we hope that we will provide some clarity and illumination for you. Who's going to be the first to contribute from the floor? Who's got the microphone? Yes, here. Yes, go ahead, sir. Say your name first, yeah?
My name is Sami.
And talk in Arabic.
Yeah. In Arabic?
Yes, please.
هلا بيقولوا على أيام الشاه إنه كان في ثورة شيوعية عم تأسس الإسقاط الشاه، بس انقلب عن طريق الخامنئي. فحبيت أعرف كيف حتى الطرف الديني تحكم بالثورة.
No, I don't agree with that. There was a nationalist revolution in Iran, which was determined. You see, Iran had been for centuries effectively divided by the big powers. The big powers played with Iran's strategic importance, and when oil became crucial during the First World War, it was Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, who first spotted the strategic importance of oil. And that's why the British took over the oil fields in Iran. So the father of the Shah was very happy just to sit on his peacock throne and enjoy the riches that came with being the king, but to allow the big powers to effectively rule his country. But Mossadegh and other nationalist Iranians said, no, this bounty which God has given us belongs to the people of Iran. It doesn't belong to foreigners in London or anywhere else. And so a nationalist revolution took place, but the British could not accept it. In many ways, they've lived to regret it, because if they hadn't overthrown Mossadegh, then of course the next 55 years of Iranian politics would have been very different. But they couldn't accept, and it was a precursor of the attitude towards President Nasser and the nationalization of the Suez Canal. They would not accept governments in this region governing their countries in the interests of their own people. And so they overthrew Mossadegh, they hanged his ministers and criminalized his movement. And of course, the Iranian people paid very dearly for that. Please, yes, go ahead. Speak in English if you'd like.
Yeah, please, if I don't mind.
Go ahead.
Actually, because Iran has many sort of religions, first of all, and I need to know what was the main purpose that a huge amount of percentage of the Iranian people left the country because of the taking over of Khamenei.
Well, it does have different religions. Iran, for example, has the largest Jewish community in the world, in the region, outside of what they call Israel. And the Jews there have an honored position as people of the book. And they even have allocated seats in the Majlis with which to speak for their interests. There are other religions, but the overwhelming majority of the Iranians, of course, are Muslim and Shiite Muslim at that. And the reason that so many Iranians are living abroad is because the Shah was there for so long that he had what Marx called a comprador, a collaborating class, which grew rich and powerful by circling him and doing his bidding. And when the revolution came, it was a very tough revolution because of all the blood that the Shah and his minions had shed. The retaliation from the revolution was strict and powerful. So many of these people left the country with their money and went to live in Los Angeles and elsewhere. Go ahead.
Back then in the 70s, Iran was one of the most important tourism companies in the Middle East, you could say. And most of the revolution teared apart.
Yes, but you can't live in slavery to suit the tourists. You know, Egypt had a lot of tourists under Mubarak, but the people were living lives of degradation and disgrace and poverty. So you can't not have a revolution because it's going to spoil the tourism for a little while. And anyway, trust me, you can't build a country on tourism. I'll be right back after this. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al-Mayadeen television in Sidon, in Lebanon. We're asking what's going on between the West and Iran. Why are they suddenly throwing flowers at each other? Does this represent a climb down by Iran or a climb down by the West? And is it real? And what will its impact be on the wider region? And some of the experts here are just bursting to have their say. Yes, sir, you at the back, please.
عمر الإبراهيم، هل بتعتقد ارتباط بريطانيا مع إيران بيأثر على علاقة أمريكا وبريطانيا؟
Well, I think both of them are marching in the same direction. The British government never strays far from the path of the United States. The tail and the dog are inextricably linked. So the British are not following a policy different from the United States, though they may follow it a little bit more quickly than the Americans will do. But Obama himself was the one who made the call to Rouhani, not the other way around. And the American media is suddenly discovering the wonders of the civilization of Iran and how important Iran is. I say hallelujah. I'm very happy about that. The Iranian people have suffered a lot through this period of sanctions. But the question is, what price will Iran be asked to pay in its wider role in the region? That's what I'm concerned about. Israel, of course, is totally against the new policy of America and the United Kingdom, as is Saudi Arabia. They're equally mad about this new turn. And so that tells you that it's real, I think, because if it's displeasing Israel and Saudi Arabia, it must be a good policy. What do you say? Okay, let me go to the back there. Yes, sir.
حسن خباز صحافي عم بدرس. بدي اسال بس بالنسبه لايران هلا حضرتك قلت انه ايران ما عم تخطط لتعمل نووي، بس انت لو محلك كنت عملت. انا بدي اسال انه في ظل هيدا الصراع اللي عم بيصير وخاصه بسوريا اللي هو صراع ديني مذهبي بشكل اساسي، شو اللي بيضمن للعالم وللغرب ولايران تحديدا والعالم العربي انه ما تستعمل هيدا النووي على الاعداء اللي هن عمليا بشكله جزء من سوريا؟
Well, of course, the only people who have ever used a nuclear weapon is the United States of America. The only country in this region that has nuclear weapons is what they call Israel. They have a mountain of weapons of mass destruction of all kinds, nuclear weapons, biological weapons, and chemical weapons. And I have no doubt at all that if they felt that they needed to do so, they would use those weapons. But they can't use them against Iran because so many of America's friends are ruling in the Persian Gulf, and the wind is no respecter of borders. And so any nuclear attack on Iran would be, of course, a big backfire, a big blowback for the United States. The best thing would be to have no nuclear weapons in this region, no biological weapons, no chemical weapons. The best thing would be no conflict in this region at all. I just made the point that I don't ever understand the argument that some people are allowed to have nuclear weapons and other people are not. What's that based on? What kind of rationale? In fact, possession of nuclear weapons gives you a reward. It gives you a place on the Security Council permanently and a veto at the United Nations if you possess nuclear weapons. So the whole policy of proliferation or anti-proliferation is completely wrong in my view. After all, the state that they call Israel never allows inspection. The IAEA would never be allowed to visit Israel, whilst it visits Iran all the time, and Iranian facilities are inspected all the time. And it has been found over and over again by these inspectors that there's no evidence, and I'm quoting them, no evidence that Iran is seeking to build a nuclear weapon. And I think we should believe them. Who else would like to contribute? Yes, madam, in the middle row. Yes, please. If wait till you get the microphone, yeah?
زهراء برجاوي. هلا عم بيتم إزالة كل الشعارات ضد أمريكا من شوارع طهران. شو السبب؟
Well, I don't think all of them are, but some of them are. The Iranian government has an explanation that these posters were put up without authorization. But I think it's fair to say, as an observer of these matters, that it's clear that Iran is ready to meet the United States halfway on this. If there is a diminution in aggression and hostility from the US towards Iran, there will be a commensurate diminution in aggression and hostility from Iran towards the United States. That's as it should be. That's how diplomacy is supposed to work. But I think that the policy of Iran towards Syria, for example, towards Lebanon, towards Palestine, towards what they call Israel, will not change. That's my honest opinion. The language of President Rouhani is different from the language of President Ahmadinejad, but I think the substance of Iranian policy of intractable opposition to Zionism and absolute support for justice and equity in the region will continue. That's why the Saudis are so unhappy about the new American policy. Who's next? Yes, sir.
محمد يوسف. هلا انت عم تحكي with all due respect، يعني انت عم تحكي عن ايران كانك اكبر المؤمنين بولايه الفقيه يعني، وكانك شخص ايراني، بس انت ما شايف انه ايران والسعوديه وجهان لعمله واحده، وانه عاده انه في انتخابات ديمقراطيه بايران، وهي وجهه نظر انه ما بتاثر طالما في السيد علي خامنئي هو انه الهيد ستيت بايران. فانت مش شايف يعني انه الاثنين الدولتين يعني قامعين الحريات وقامعين كل شيء تحت اسم الدين سواء سني او شيعي، انه وجهان لعمله واحده؟
Well, I don't see why you say I'm talking as if I were a cleric. I'm not a cleric. I'm not a Shiite. I'm not an Iranian. So I don't understand why you reduce things to this sectarian level. I'm speaking as I see it. And as I see it, Iran is more democratic than the other countries that neighbor Iran. This is incontestable. There are no elections in Saudi Arabia. There are no elections in Kuwait, in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates. No elections at all. At least the Iranian people can elect a parliament, and their elections are very hotly contested. At least the Iranian people can choose a president. Nobody can choose the king or the emir of the countries around Iran. And of course there is a supreme leader in Iran because there is a political system in Iran which is unique to Iran. And the Iranian people made a revolution in order to bring this system about. And this supreme authority of religious people is what the mass of the Iranian people want. And who are you or who am I to contradict that? If the Iranian people don't want that system, I'm sure that having brought down the Shah, they would bring down that system if they didn't like it. How you can compare the two, Iran and Saudi Arabia, is completely beyond me. Saudi Arabia has betrayed, you're Palestinian, right?
I'm Iraqi.
Saudi Arabia has betrayed everything sacred to the Arabs for decades, for most of a century. Saudi Arabia is the United States' biggest ally, Britain's biggest ally in stealing the wealth of the Arabs from the Gulf to the Atlantic. Iran isn't stealing anybody's wealth. Iran is giving its wealth. When the Palestinian people in Gaza defend themselves against Israeli aggression, whose weapons are they using? Who gave them weapons? Did Saudi Arabia give them any weapons? Saudi Arabia hasn't even given them bread to eat. So whatever the shortcomings of Iran, they cannot be compared to Saudi Arabia. And I don't believe that the conflict in Syria is about religion, is about sectarianism. The real conflict in Syria is about whether the former Crusader powers should be allowed to dictate the outcome of civil conflict inside Syria. I say that only the Syrians can decide what happens in Syria. Not Chechens, not Libyans, not British or Belgian or French Muslims or Saudi Arabia or Qatar or any of these other Western satrapies in the Gulf. Go ahead.
انا معك بهالنقطه، يعني انا مش ضد انه انا مش مع الثوره السوريه او هيك شيء، بس انه قصدي انا مش قصدي انه بالسياسات الخارجيه، قصدي بالداخل، قصدي بالحريات الداخليه. يعني انه المراه بايران انها نفس الحريه نفس اللي بالسعوديه، عدا الموضوع السواقه وعدا موضوع الانتخابات.
Habibi, that's so completely wrong. I can only imagine you have never been in Iran. The idea that women in Iran who drive cars, who work, who travel, move around freely in the society, they don't have to have a male relative walking beside them. They are not lashed if they drive a motor car or show some of their hair, is completely wrong. Actually, Iranian women run Iran in Tehran. Women are in all the important positions in the media, in banking, in education, in public life. Everywhere you see women in Iran. You don't see women anywhere in Saudi Arabia. They're just, these two things are completely incomparable. Go on. Wallah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
وسام الحاج، عندي سؤالين. السؤال الأول هو عن مجاهدي خلق، وليش ما في إعلام بيحكي عنن وفي نوع من التجاهل الأوروبي أو الغربي. السؤال الثاني، منطقة الأهواز منطقة عربية بإيران، وبنفس الوقت هي تخسر، يعني ما عندها أي حقوق عفوا، وبفترة كانوا عم بيطالبوا باستقلال، وبرضه في تعتيم وتجاهل عربي وغربي عنن. اوكي.
Who is calling for independence?
سكان مقاطعة الأهواز بفترة كانوا عم بيحكوا بهذا الشيء.
Sure. Let me answer that after the break. It's an important question. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al-Mayadeen television, coming to you from the LIU in Sidon in Lebanon. We're discussing Iran and the West and what it all means. And before the break, a young man asked some very important questions about the rights of ethnic minorities. For example, in Iran, he mentioned the Arab minority. There's also a Baluch minority in Iran, which has demands for greater autonomy. But he also asked about the Mujahideen Khalq, which is a cult-like opposition group of terrorists inside Iran, which has been responsible for some of the most horrific acts of terrorism in Iran over the last 30 years or more, and indeed outside Iran. This organization is listed as a terrorist organization almost everywhere in the world because of their methodology. It's a cult led by a man and his wife Rajavi and his wife Mariam, the followers are required to regard these two leaders as almost deities, and I don't think you should be feeling too much sympathy for them. Certainly the vast majority of Iranian people do not have any sympathy for them. As to the rights of the minorities, you may have a point. Arab minorities, Baluch minorities should have their rights of autonomy within the state of Iran. But that's true of many minorities in many countries. And borders are borders. And it's not easy to undo borders after the length of time that these borders have existed. But of course, I'm not here to suggest, unlike our friend's accusation earlier, that everything in Iran is rosy, or that I support everything that happens in Iran. I don't support many things that happen in Iran. But we should judge Iran by the standards of the other countries around it. And by those standards, Iran is way in advance. Let's take the young man in the middle with the glasses. Yes, sir.
هل هذا التقارب اللي بيناتهم انه هو مصلحة مؤقتة بس ام هو تشكيل حلف جديد او كيف؟
Well, this is the big question. Of course, it's too early to say. But the signs are, I walk the corridors of power in London. I walk through the Palace of Westminster on a daily basis, and for more than 25 years. And I think I've developed a good sense of when a strategic direction is being taken by the state. And I believe that the path that has been announced is a real one, and that a calculation has been made that Iran is not going to be brought down by the previous policy, and that therefore it's time to try a new direction. It's time to try a new relationship with the Islamic Republic. I hope so, because Iran is a great country. It represents a great civilization. It hasn't attacked or invaded anybody for 300 years. I wish I could say the same for my own country, which has attacked almost everybody in the last 300 years. So I'm hoping that it is a genuine turn to a new policy. What about someone from this side? Yes, sir, in the front row.
عمر طافش student in the LRU. انحكى كثير بوسائل الإعلام عن ضربة أمريكية لسوريا. لنفترض جدلا إنه هذه الضربة تمت. لنفترض جدلا إنه هذه الضربة تمت. بدي أعرف الموقف الإيراني حيال هذه الضربة، وهل ممكن بترتب على هذه الضربة حرب عالمية ثالثة؟
Well, there's not now going to be an American strike on Syria, and that's because the British Parliament, by a very small majority, rejected the British Prime Minister's demand that we should join a strike. This stopped President Obama in his tracks. He was forced to put it to the US Congress. And the Congress reported that the public was by 200-300 to 1 against another American war in the Arab Middle East. And so that policy came to a dead end, because, as I've been saying here on Al-Mayadeen, they underestimated the strength of the Syrian state. They underestimated the determination of the Syrian people not to be atomized on a sectarian basis into emirates, 2, 3, 10, 20 different emirates. They underestimated the faithfulness of Russia and China towards their ally in the region, and they underestimated the extent to which the Syrian opposition would be taken over by Al-Qaeda type fanaticism. So there will be no American strike, so it's the ultimate hypothetical question. But if it had taken place, we would now be in the middle of a regional war of cataclysmic proportions, and nobody could predict the outcome of that. Iran, a part of Lebanon, Syria itself, Russia, China would all be on one side of that war, and who knows who would have been on the other side. But having taken a look into that abyss, the British and the Americans pulled back, and I think we should be grateful for that. Someone over here in the middle. No, someone else hasn't spoken yet. Yes, madam.
إسراج الزيني. بدي أسأل شو هو تأثير التقارب الإيراني البريطاني، شو تأثيره على لبنان وسوريا بالأخص؟ Thank you.
Well, I don't believe that Iran will change its strategic relationship with the Lebanese resistance or with the Syrian Arab Republic. I don't believe that Iran will change its attitude to the settler state just a few miles down the road from here. I don't believe that Iran will change its attitude to the Palestinian people living under siege or occupation or annexation or in the diaspora as refugees. I don't believe that any of those things will change. But the policy will be expressed in sweeter words. President Rouhani is a more diplomatic character than President Ahmadinejad was, but I don't believe that it will change the relationship of Iran to this region. Not materially, I really don't think so. Obviously, America and Britain hope that it will, but I don't believe that that will happen. Who else would like to talk? Yes, gentleman at the back.
خالد عنتر، أنت قلت إنه إيران ما احتلت ولا دولة على فترة أكثر من 300 سنة، بس هي عم تتدخل بسياسات دول تانية عن طريق دعمها لحماس وحزب الله.
Well, if you mean that Iran is intervening against the Zionist settler state of Israel, surely we should be welcoming that. If all the Muslim countries intervened in support of the Palestinian resistance, Palestine would be free, and Ain al-Helwi camp would be empty, and the Palestinian people would be back in their country. I never thought I would be asked in an Arab country why someone should be supporting Hamas, which is an important part of the Palestinian people's resistance to illegal occupation and usurpation. Iran is supporting good things, not bad things, in other countries. It's not supporting oppressors in other countries. It's supporting the oppressed in other countries. But the fact remains, Iran has never invaded or occupied anybody else's territory in 300 years. This is a matter of historical fact. Who else would like to speak? Yes, sir.
سؤال، بتعتقد بينجح التقارب الغربي مع إيران خاصة بعد انتقادات حرس الجمهوري لحسن روحاني بعد الاتصال اللي صار بينه وبين أوباما؟ السؤال الأول. السؤال الثاني، بتعتقد إنه هل حيصير يعمل أزمة داخلية بإيران التقارب بين روحاني والغرب مع الحرس الجمهوري كمؤسسة؟
Well, obviously there are different strands of opinion with Iran. This is the point I was making. Iran actually has a real, live, democratic polity where these things are fiercely argued. And there is a section of the Revolutionary Guard that is anxious that this rapprochement will mean a big change in Iran's relationship to the rest of the world. And it's a good thing that they feel that way, and it's a good thing that they express that point of view. But I don't believe that it's the view of the Revolutionary Guard as a whole. I think that Ayatollah Khamenei made an important speech to them in advance of Rouhani's visit to New York. And I think that he assuaged any anxiety on their part by telling them that the new diplomatic path was not a big turn by Iran to a wholly different policy. But it's good that these things are argued out, and in public, in the parliament, in the media, and it's not something that happens anywhere else. The reality is that politics is a dynamic business. When you take a step, everything looks different. I took 2 steps backward there at the orders of my director. You look different to me now, 2 steps back. If I move 2 steps in that direction, you'll look different again. If I stand up on your chair, everything will look different. Politics is a dynamic business, and no one can predict the exact outcome of these things. I'm giving you my best analysis, that this rapprochement represents a climb down by the West rather than a climb down by Iran. Yes, sir, at the back, yes.
إيهاب مملوك. شو الأسباب اللي أدت اللي قربت العلاقة بين شو الأسباب اللي قربت العلاقة بين المصالح البريطانية والإيرانية وليش اليوم؟ شكرا.
Well, I think that their policy in Syria has failed. And I think a necessary concomitant of a policy having failed in Syria is to look at the overarching policy which the Syrian track was a vital part of. They believed that the regime in Damascus would fall easily. And you'll recall they were predicting its demise right from the start. Erdogan, Davutoglu were even putting a matter of weeks on it. Erdogan predicted Bashar will fall in 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 6 weeks. But he didn't fall, and he's not going to fall. So the Western policy towards Syria failed. But the reason they were trying to bring down the Syrian regime was as part of a proxy war against Iran. And that too now must be revisited. Because if you cannot defeat the Lebanese resistance, as Israel found, if you cannot defeat Syria, as they have now found in the Syrian war, then your chances of defeating Iran and bringing it low and changing its regime are non-existent. So it's time for them, I think, to try a new policy, and I think that that's what they are doing. Yes, sir.
عباس إبراهيم، هل التقرب البريطاني الإيراني رح يكون له علاقة على الملف النووي الإيراني بشكل إيجابي؟
Yes, and I think that you see, if Iran has no intention to build nuclear weapons, there is no reason to act as if you are going to build nuclear weapons. And this has been a weakness in Iranian diplomacy over the last few years. If you have no intention to build nuclear weapons, there is no reason why you need to act in a way that makes people suspicious of what you are doing. So I think the Iranian policy now will be absolute transparency. The IAEA can be satisfied. The delegate from Iran in Geneva just yesterday put forward new ideas to the IAEA which can satisfy them about Iran's intentions. Iran wants nuclear power, which is its right and is every country's right, for peaceful purposes, for purposes of energy and for purposes of medicine. And in that case, there is no reason for a standoff between anybody and Iran on this question. And I think that the nuclear dossier will be resolved over the next period. And I believe it could have been resolved. The West was using the nuclear question as a device to maintain a policy of sanctions against Iran, which were hurting the Iranian people very severely indeed, and hurting its currency, hurting its economy, hurting its society. So it's good if Iran can get out from under this policy of isolation and ostracism and sanction. I'm at the LIU in Sidon. The debate is heating up, not quite to nuclear levels, but hot enough. I'll be back right after this. Welcome back to Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al-Mayadeen television at the LIU in Sidon in Lebanon. We're asking what's going on between the West and Iran. Yes, madam, what's your view?
زينب فرحات صحافي. سؤالي هو ببلد كانوا يسموا إيران فيه الشيطان الأكبر، كيف تحول مثل ما هلا عم نشوف لدولة صديقة، وشو كيف المجتمع البريطاني عم يتأقلم مع هيدي التسمية بما انه عاصر أزمنة كانت دائما هي عدو له منا صديق.
Well, look, there are no friendships between countries. There are only interests. And it's in the interests of America and Britain to draw down their period of hostility with Iran and replace it with a better relationship. They believe that this will help them, for example, in the withdrawal from Afghanistan, which otherwise could be conducted under fire. And they hope that Iran will help them to withdraw from Afghanistan in good order with the least amount of humiliation. They believe that working with Iran, they can more easily resolve the crisis with Syria. They believe that Iran's enormous importance economically, culturally, societally will be better managed if they have a better relationship to an Islamic Republic that isn't going to go away anywhere. From the Iranian standpoint, they were, it's true, involved in a long and bitter confrontation with the United States. After all, the United States had been the primary backer of the Shah. It had given the Shah all the torture and military equipment that he used to subjugate his people. They had used the embassy in Tehran as a vital nerve center of the Shah's attempt to put down the Iranian Revolution before its triumph. It was a nest of American spies who were acting against the people of Iran. There was then the takeover of the embassy, the abortive attempts to rescue the American personnel in the embassy. There was a long period in which the rhetoric of the great Satan was prevalent. I believe this will now come to an end. But it doesn't mean that Iran's fundamental relationship to the world is going to suit the United States. That's why I believe, notwithstanding the opposition that there is in Iran to this new policy, that this represents a climb down by the United States and Britain rather than a climb down by Iran. Let's go where now? Yes, to the middle. Yeah. You, sir.
I'll speak in English if you don't mind.
Yes, go ahead.
Recently, Iran has been showing their new updated weapons through the media. Are there any some kind of intelligent agency in a challenge between the CIA or MI6, the British back then, just like the Cold War?
Well, the British and American intelligence agencies never sleep. Indeed, they are listening to every one of your telephone calls. They're reading every one of your texts. They know everything that you have ever looked for on the internet. As we now know, in Spain, they were hacking 70 million telephone calls every month. In France, 60 million telephone calls every month. Even the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, was having her private mobile telephone listened to by these intelligence agencies. So you can be sure that these intelligence agencies are trying to follow everything that they can inside Iran. And the Israeli intelligence is murdering people in Iran, university professors, scientists, to try and weaken Iran technologically, industrially, economically. And so this will go on, no doubt. It will go on. But Iran is a powerful country. It's showing off its weapons because it wants to deter other countries from attacking it. It has no intention of attacking anybody else. And I'm glad that Iran is strong and powerful. If it was weak, it would have already been invaded and would have been occupied in the way that its neighbor Iraq was invaded and occupied. We should be glad that Iran has proved too strong for an Iraq-style subjugation in the interests of the wicked. Who else? Yes, sir, go ahead.
أحمد بديع انجينيرينج. هل يا ترى اتفاقية بين إيران وأمريكا بتكون ورقة تسوية على سلاح حزب الله بلبنان مع العلم إنه بريطانيا صوتت مع سوريا بالوضع اللي هي فيه؟
Well, I don't believe so. The Lebanese resistance requires weapons to defend Lebanon against Israeli aggression. The Lebanese resistance is the only Arab army ever to defeat Israel on the battlefield. You should be proud about that. The demand to disarm the Lebanese resistance will never be complied with as long as Israel is occupying some of Lebanon and regularly violating Lebanon's sovereignty and its vital national interests. I don't believe that the Lebanese resistance will hand over its weapons, whatever happens, on the Iran-America-British track. And I don't believe that Iran will try to pressure them to do so either. Yes, sir.
Hello again. هلا بما انه ايران هالدوله الديمقراطيه واللي فيها حريه وهيك، اذا سمعت عن قصه نينا مرادي اللي هي كانت مرشحه لكازوين سيري كونسل وفازت بالبد يعني، وما خلوها تشارك لانه هي كانت محجبه بس حجاب معتدل، ما خلوها تشارك لانه كانت حلوه كثير، انه اعتبروها فتنه بالنسبه للي بيشتغلوا معها. شو رايك؟ بس بدي اعرف رايك بهالموضوع.
I don't know where you get this information for, that somebody was not allowed to run because they were very pretty. It's, by the grace of God, I know many pretty Iranian women, and they are in politics, in media, in banking, in education, everywhere. You're reading the wrong propaganda, brother. You thought that the lot of Iranian women was exactly the same as the lot of Saudi women, when in fact Iranian women would laugh at the idea that this was so. So this is just nonsense. I don't know why this woman wasn't allowed to run. I have never heard of this woman before. But I'm absolutely certain that if she was not allowed to run, it was not because she was too pretty, as you put it.
إذا مش سامع فيها فيك يعني you can look it up. وفيك تعرف
No,
يعني.
I can't look. I could look it up if I believed the nonsense that you read on the internet. And I didn't say that Iran was such a democratic country. I said it was a more democratic country than your friends in the same region.
No, they're not my friends.
No, they are your friends.
They're not my friends.
They are your friends.
I'm sorry.
Because
I'm against Saudi more than I'm against Iran.
You are parroting their propaganda. You are throwing at me exactly the nonsense that they pay newspapers and television stations here in Lebanon and elsewhere to parrot. So they are your friends.
No, they're not.
Whether you admit it or not.
Believe me, they're not.
There's no point in me looking up whether a woman was banned from running because she was too pretty. This is totally insulting to Iran, to the women of Iran. It's totally insulting. It's rubbish. It's nonsense. You're not studying hard enough at the LIU if you're repeating this kind of nonsense on a television program. By the way, people all over the Arab world are going to be watching this program.
Yeah, it's okay.
You don't want to make a fool of yourself by continuing to repeat this rubbish. Okay, you're a sucker for more. Go on.
انه ما فيك تهاجمني قبل ما تعرف القصه وقبل ما تقراها القصه، انه انت عم تهاجم هيك بدون سبب بدون دليل وانت مش سامع فيها للبنت. نينا مراد, just go look her up.
Because you're saying a woman was banned because she was too pretty.
Yes,
this is a lie.
No,
this is propaganda.
No, it's not.
It's nonsense.
Believe me, it's not.
Well, look. You told us earlier that Iranian women had the same position in their society as Saudi women have in theirs. This is a lie.
And I stand by this.
Saudi women are not allowed to drive cars. Are Iranian women?
I said with the exception of car driving.
Okay, never mind car driving. Let's leave that rather important matter aside. Let's park it, as the Americans say. Are Iranian women totally visible in Iranian society? Are they everywhere in public life? Yes or no?
Yes, but did she or did she not get fired because she was too pretty?
That's another small exception you wish to park. I don't know how else they are comparable in that case. How else?
Believe me, Saudi are not my friends. I'm against them, but I'm also against
Iranian
Iran.
Women in parliament? Yes. Are there Iranian women in elected councils? Yes. Is there an elected parliament? Yes.
Wasn't she fired for being too pretty? Yes.
Councils? Yes. Are women allowed to drive? Yes. Are women everywhere in the public arena? Yes. So you're wrong on every one of these points.
No, I'm not. Believe me,
and I suspect you're wrong about this now famous, pretty
Nina
woman.
Muradi, just
we'll
go look
all
her
be
up.
looking her now to see just how pretty she is. Who else would like to talk? Yes, sir.
بعيد عن حديث النسوان وومن واند يعني اتس بوري يعني بعيد عن حديث الومن. في مثل سياسي بيقول بالسياسة ما في عدو دائم وما في صديق دائم، انما هناك مصالح مشتركة. بدي اعرف المصالح المشتركة بين ايران وامريكا وبريطانيا، وشو الموقف الشعب البريطاني منها؟
Well, the British people have not been consulted on either the previous policy or the current one. We have been treated to decades of unremitting hostile propaganda against Iran in the West. The latest example of which was the movie that won the Oscar last year, Argo. If you watch Argo, the Iranians, the Muslims, are bearded, savage, primitive fanatics. And the Americans and their allies are nice people who have nice dinner parties and only want the best. Well, most Western people, fed a diet of this kind of propaganda, believe it. And so they will not be fully aware of why the line has changed. But as we found out over Syria, neither the American people nor the British people want to be at war with anybody. We have enough wars. In New York City yesterday, in Brooklyn, 5 people were murdered, stabbed to death on the street. 4 of them were children. We have enough problems in our own societies without maintaining hostile intention against other people. No more questions until after the break. I'll be right back. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, for Al-Mayadeen Television here at the LIU in Sidon in Lebanon, where the debate on Iran has really hotted up, and some of them will be regretting some of the things that they said, in my humble opinion. Yes, madam, in the middle.
انت قلت انه كل دولة بحق لها انه يكون عندها نيوكليير ويبونز، بس ليش هلا سوريا عم بفككوا لها السلاح النووي اللي عندها؟ وكمان سؤال تاني، انه انت قلت انه ايران ما بتستعمله ضد حدا، بس هي بتدافع انه عن انه حامية حالها فيه. كمان هيدا الشيء لما فككوا لسوريا بيضعف النظام السوري وبيخليك كمان انه ممكن حدا يجي
No, I don't think that everyone has the right to nuclear weapons. I'm against all nuclear weapons. I was arrested in Britain protesting against British nuclear weapons. I gave the only interview ever given on the BBC upside down, being carried away by police officers to prison. I'm against nuclear weapons. I just made the point, why should some people be allowed to have nuclear weapons while other people are not allowed to have nuclear weapons? I don't want people to have chemical weapons. I don't want people to have biological weapons. I don't want people to have weapons at all. But biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons are weapons unlimited in space and time. This means their effect is experienced decades after the use of those chemical weapons. In Vietnam, children are still being born deformed because of American use of chemical weapons almost 50 years ago. And the spread of the effects of these weapons is so terrible. They should not exist. And every country should agree to abolish them. But I don't accept that Israel can have hundreds of nuclear weapons pointed at Iran, whilst Iran has no right to have nuclear weapons to defend itself. But it's an academic point, because Iran has no intention of building nuclear weapons. And the IAEA has admitted over and over again that there is no evidence, quote, no evidence that Iran is seeking to build a nuclear weapon. I think the Syrian regime did the right thing in giving up its chemical weapons. I don't believe it was the regime who used the chemical weapons in the first place, because it was not in their interest to do so. It was against their interest to do so. And governments act in their own interest, not against their own interest. But the military situation on the ground in Syria had already begun to swing decisively in favor of the state and against the foreign-backed invasion of the country. And that's not going to change just because Syria has destroyed its chemical weapons. Big question now is where these chemical weapons are going to be buried. I hope they're not going to be buried here in Lebanon. Who else would like to come back in? Yes, sir.
علاء الزغبي صحافي. مثل ما بنعرف كلنا انه في تقارب امريكي اسرائيلي ومصالح مشتركه، هل ممكن هالتقارب الايراني الامريكي يشكل للمستقبل تقارب ايراني اسرائيلي بنفس الوقت؟
I really don't. I don't believe as long as the Islamic Republic of Iran exists that there will ever be rapprochement between Iran and Israel, because Iran, unlike virtually all of the Arab countries, has faithfully supported the Palestinian people under occupation, under siege, in exile, under annexation. It's given them money, it's given them food, it's given them weapons, it's given them diplomatic and political support. The first act of the Iranian Revolution was to expel the Israeli ambassador and all of his staff and give the embassy to the PLO. They gave the embassy, the huge Israeli embassy in Tehran, to the Palestine Liberation Organization. That was the very first act that they carried out, and I don't believe that that's going to change. Who else? Yes, sir. Wallah, you've been in 3 times now.
Thank you, sir. I'll take that as a compliment. I'll ask a question in English again, if you don't mind. In GCC countries, there are some islands which are originally are for the UAE country. For instance, Kish. But some islands were occupied by the Irani forces. Are they having any intentions for building any army bases, or do they have any strategies, any predictions for?
First of all, it depends what you mean originally.
Yeah.
The United Arab Emirates is a very new country, and it wasn't created by Arabs.
You could say that.
And there are all sorts of issues involved in the Gulf as to who has a port and who doesn't have a port, who has islands, who doesn't have islands. You'll recall the conflict between Iraq and Kuwait was on precisely this question. Kuwait itself was not created by Arabs. It was taken from Iraq by Britain and made into an independent country. So there are many such issues. But if Iran had any hostile intentions towards Arab countries, don't you think that Bahrain would have been the place for them to start, where their co-religionists are being murdered by a brutal dictatorship with a tiny social base, and where the overwhelming majority of the people of Bahrain want rid of that dictatorship? Has Iran sent one weapon, one fighter? Has Iran committed one act of aggression in Bahrain? No. So I believe that this canard, this falsehood that Iran is somehow a threat to the Arabs, is a self-serving piece of propaganda by regimes in the Gulf who wish to persuade other Arabs in a sectarian way of this falsehood. I'm not sure I could let you in for the 4th time, at least before I see if anyone else wants to make a point. Yes, the lady at the back.
وين موقع لبنان بهالتحالف البريطاني الإيراني؟
Lebanon is a very important country. It's strategically placed next to Syria, very close to Palestine, and it's a matter that occupies, I'm sure, much of the thinking of Western politicians. They have liked to use Lebanon in the past. They would have liked to use Lebanon as a knife in the back of Syria, but this has not happened. The Lebanese people, contrary to all the propaganda, have not broken apart. I was in Lebanon in the 1970s. I lived here. I know what civil war looks like in Lebanon. And it's a very ugly sight. And the vast majority of Lebanese people have no intention of going down that road again. And I hope that that continues. But because Lebanon is a small country, and because Lebanon is where it is, its fate is inextricably linked to the fate of the whole of Bilad al-Sham, including, of course, occupied Palestine. Last call. Yes, sir.
في فكر سائد عند كثير من العالم بلبنان بيحكوا انه الغرب استعمل ايران كفزاعة على دول الخليج، نوع من التخويف لدول الخليج خاصة السعودية، بانه كان يبيع اسلحة، صفقات اسلحة باسعار مرتفعة حتى تحمي حالها من ايران، كون ايران هي العدو لها. والفكر استمر بهذه الفترة اكثر، انه هذه المرحلة انتهت، اللعبة بين الغرب وإيران بتخويف الخليج، خاصة أنه بالتصريح الأخير للخارجية الأمريكية أنه أمريكا تعبت من إدارة شؤون الشرق الأوسط، أنه هي لازم تتفضل لأشياء تانية وما تضل موجودة هون. فهل التقارب اللي حاصل، هو سؤال مركب، التقارب الحاصل بين الغرب وإيران هو لإنهاء هذه المرحلة أو لأنه أمريكا تعبت وبدها تترك هذه المنطقة وتفل؟
No, I think it's a strategic turn of major importance. I think that we are seeing a new status quo emerging in the world, in which China and Russia are major players, in which Iran is respected as an important regional power, an important Islamic power. Saudi Arabia is very, very unhappy about this strategic turn and is trying to use sections of the Lebanese people to sabotage this rapprochement. But I don't believe that they will succeed. And I don't believe they will be allowed by the United States to continue this policy for very much longer, because the tail never wags the dog. The dog always wags the tail. And I don't think that Lebanon is a major buyer of arms. I don't think that the arms in Lebanon were bought for the most part. I think that Lebanon has a lot of arms in a micro context, but not a lot of arms on the big scale. Lebanon is a country where people of all kinds, different religions, different sects, are forced to coexist together in an amicable manner. And I hope that they will continue to do so, and I hope that they will do so better than they have been of late. I'm against, this is the one point I'm going to agree with the gentleman in the front row upon. I'm against sectarianism. I'm against the sectarianization of politics. I believe in the Arabs. I believe the Arabs are one, from Marrakesh to Bahrain, whether they are Christian or Muslim, whether they are Sunni or Shia. Their interests are the same. And they could be, if they were together, a big superpower in the world, one that every part of the world had to take account of, had to listen to, and had to act in accordance with the wishes of 350 million Arabs. This is what I believe. If only the Arabs would believe it. If they did, you'd be in a lot better position than you are today. I'm getting a nod of agreement from my young friend in the front row. Alhamdulillah, we agreed on something. Let me take one last question before we close. Yes, the lady in the pink jacket.
لور مش منه سؤال، بس الفكره اللي بدي اقولها، بدي اعقب على شيء انت هلا كنت عم بتقوله. كنت عم بتقول انه مثل حلمك انه هو يصيروا العرب ايد وحده، بس الفكره انه العرب مستحيل يصير في ايد وحده طالما في قوى عظمى مثل ايران، وطالما في ناس كتير كبار راسهم بالنسبه إلي هن بس بمجرد هن عم بيحكوا السياسه، بغض النظر شو كانت هيدي السياسه، اذا في اتفاقيات ولا ما في اتفاقيات. طالما في ايران، طالما في السعوديه، طالما في امريكا، طالما في بريطانيا، طالما في كل هول القوى العظمى اللي هي عم تتحكم بهول العرب اللي كتير صغار، فمستحيل اكيد يكون العرب ايد وحده.
But honestly, madam, I don't understand how you can equate Iran with the United States or Iran with Saudi Arabia. In what way is Iran stopping the Arabs from uniting? The Arabs can unite anytime they like. but they don't like. This is the problem.
don't like لأنه في شيء أكبر منهم بكتير هو اللي عم يتحكم فيهم عم بيخليهم ما يعملوا اللي هن بدهم إياه.
No. If I have one message which I have been trying to deliver for 40 years to Arab audiences, it is this: that the only thing stopping you from uniting is you.
بس إيران مثل أمريكا.
The United States cannot control the streets of Brooklyn. The United States cannot pay its electricity bills. The United States cannot stop the Lebanese people being together, the Lebanese being together with the Syrians, the Lebanese and the Syrians being together with the Iraqis. They cannot stop the Arabs being together. Only the Arabs are stopping the Arabs being together. As long as people sit in coffee shops with their argili, blaming the Hawaja, blaming the Turkish, blaming the British, blaming the Israelis, blaming the Saudis, blaming the Iranians, you will always be divided. And as long as you're divided, you'll be weak. And as long as you are weak, they'll steal your wealth. It's not rocket science. You don't have to be Einstein to work it out. Unity is strength. If you could only stop thinking like Sunni and Shia, like Lebanese and Syrian, like left and right, like Maghrebi or Levantine, if you could, or Gulfi, if you could only stop thinking like that. You are 350 million people who speak the same language. You know, in Europe, we speak 150 languages. You speak one language with one God. Imagine the strength that you could have if you came together. But as long as you are ready to sit and blame other people, you will never be united. And as long as you are not united, you will be divided. And as long as you are divided, they will steal your things. That's why they're doing it. They don't care if you're Sunni or Shia. They don't. Listen, madam, in the parliament in which I sit, there's 650 members. If I ask them one by one to define the difference between Sunni and Shia, none of them could do so. None of them. They don't care if you're Sunni or Shia. They don't care if you pray or fast or make Hajj. They don't care about Islam. They don't care about religion. They just care about dividing you. They just care about making you fight against each other. As long as you're fighting each other, you're not fighting them. You're not fighting Israel. You're allowing them to steal your oil, steal your gas, steal your water. You're allowing them to rob you of that which God gave you. I'm sorry if I'm passionate about this, because it's the most important thing of them all, that the Arabs can find it within themselves to be one people. Shahab Arabi Wahad. Wahad. This should be your slogan. It's been marvelous. Thank you very much indeed.